So I arrived from California to the Chicago area in 1983, moved to Edgewater in 1989, and then purchased this house in 1990. Lived here ever since then, so that's over 34 years. And when I moved in to this area in 1990-ish, it's been a stable residential area in this part we call Magnolia-Glen, which I think started to be called Magnolia-Glen right around then. There had been some maybe issues with the high school now and then, with the occasional shootings and gang trouble in the early 90s. But with the local block club and Edgewater Community Council and the alderman's office, it seemed like a lot of that was responded to, or at least it simmered down after a while. So public safety, while it's still always been a high concern for anybody who lives in Chicago, had not been as salient, let's say, after the mid to late 90s. Kind of calmed down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I got involved in the local block club in 91, I believe. Served 2 years as president of EPIC, and then went on to become a board member of the Edgewater Community Council and the housing chairman for a couple of years there through the Operation Ridge period, which began in the 1993 or 94, I believe, for a few years. It was a follow-up to Operation Winthrop-Kenmore, since that had been so successful. The next worst-looking street was Ridge, with, at that time, burnt-out buildings, gang activity, litter, predominantly very ugly-looking. Kind of like an ugly part of the ward that thousands of people drove through every day. So to create a little bit more pride in Edgewater, beautification, and safety, that was the project that Edgewater Community Council and the Alderman's Office and local block clubs focused on. And it was a good effort, and I was involved with that for a few years, including purchasing a 13-unit building on Ridge in Victoria and using one of the incentive programs, Class 9, from the Cook County, to get it renovated for affordable housing and help beautify also the strip with I think it was like 50 or 60 planter boxes that we built over a 3-year period, beginning in 95, which also helped beautify and make the street safer, because it provided a little bit of a physical buffer between the thousands of cars that were driving along the sidewalks. No parking was ever allowed on Ridge, so there was no buffer there, and the buildings that were very close to the traffic, no front yards for most of the buildings along Ridge. So yeah, that was my involvement. Edgewater Beautiful was also a very big part of doing that. The Etna Edgewater Triangle Neighborhood Association Block Club was also very involved in that effort, and to some extent the other block clubs around Barge and Epic and Liquid Balmoral. So that took us to 97, when Alderman Marianne Smith saw the work I'd done in the past 3 years along Ridge with rehabbing a 13-unit building, being involved in the housing committee of Edgewater Community Council, working with Edgewater Beautiful, the various block clubs in the area, and also organized a mass volunteer day with Chicago Cares, which I think was in 95. We had over 100 volunteers just from Chicago Cares, along with the block club reps. We closed Ridge down for a short period of time in the middle of the day so we could do our projects. And so after all those accomplishments...
What kind of projects were those?
The planter building, the litter pickup primarily. Yeah, mostly the planter building. We rototilled every single parkway in Ridge, which was the challenge, finding car batteries and tires buried into those parkways, even though they were very small. They were like 2.5 to 3 feet wide. But a lot of vehicles had parked up on those parkways, so they were very compacted over the years, and litter was just strewn and buried in there as well. So after all that work, that I was involved with, the alderman offered me a job working as one of her aides in 1997. So that's how I got my first start in politics, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how long did you stay in the alderman's office?
I was there for 90 to 2011. So in that office, I was 97.
14 years?
Yeah, 14 years. And then in 2011, I went on to a different ward, 47th Ward with Alderman Amaya Pawar, the first Asian American alderman for Chicago, who set himself term limits of 2 terms, which was 8 years. So I was another 8 years there in the 47th Ward.
So when you first got involved with the community, it was through the block club, and then that eventually led to involvement with the Edgewater Community Council?
That's correct.
And could you just talk a little bit about the dynamics and the mechanics of how that kind of evolved? Was it all more or less natural, or?
So the Epic Block Club was very proactive and sent flyers out regularly back then in 1990, and they had I learned, they had officers, I believe 5 officers, and who lived in this area within a couple blocks. And so they were always recruiting for members and also for officers. And since I was fresh blood back then, and Paul Damien, who was the president, was not looking to seek re-election. So he encouraged me to get more involved with the leadership of EPIC, and so eventually I was president. Again, I guess pretty quickly, a year later, maybe 1991. And so getting involved with the Block Club was a natural, or naturally led to learning more about Edgewater Community Council, because back then Edgewater Community Council had quarterly meetings where they invited the block club leadership to meet and discuss issues. And I believe the alderman's office was also at that time having, I can't remember how often, yearly, let's say, or more, meetings with all the block clubs to keep in touch with them. So it was really nice to be in a capacity as block club leader, president, where you automatically got ties to the large organizations of the community, so you could see what's going on and voice whatever concerns you have in your neck of the woods. So that was how I found out about Edgewater Community Council in the alderman's office.
So could you talk a little bit more about the problems you were encountering when you first got here, or that you perceived the community as having? You previously mentioned some of the public safety issues, and I don't know if there were any other types of glaring issues, like right in this EPIC area. Sure. Specifically.
So public safety, I'd say, was number one. We had Sen High School in our backyard, and the kids walking along Thorndale to the L station created some minor nuisances, especially in the afternoons when they got off school. And that tends to be when some of the shootings or gang issues occurred, would be in the afternoon. The other issues that I can recall, and I actually, since my background was in research, sociological research, we did a survey, and I believe you, John Holden, have the material from that survey that I bequeathed to you, to whoever, EPIC or the Historic Society, the historic material I had from EPIC through the years. And sorry, I don't remember what the results of the survey were. I know public safety was number one, but there was also concern about the schools, because back then Sen was a school that drew students from all over the city. I can't remember what that's called.
Magnet?
No, it wasn't a magnet.
Open enrollment?
Sorry, I don't remember. I don't think it was called. No, it wasn't called a magnet. But kids from like the South Side could be coming in. It was. I don't know if it had to do with the integration or what have you. But anyway, so a lot of neighbors were not in favor of that scenario, because you have all these kids coming from another neighborhood, like let's just say some might be coming from the South Side. Then they have to take the train all the way up here, which is, could be an hour or so commute, and then be mixed in with the kids here. So a lot of neighbors didn't feel that was the best situation. And then eventually changed, where it became more of a neighborhood school, and had the academies put in. So schools were an issue because they were, again, tied in with public safety. There were some probably initial concerns with parking, though I think it became more of an issue as the neighborhood became more well-known or discovered. Maybe.
Attractive.
Yeah. So that you had more people wanting to move in here who had cars and weren't renters or weren't commuters, public transportation commuters. There was some concern with litter back then, and probably a little bit about housing, but more so keeping the housing stock, sound, so that no building becomes derelict. There had been a few buildings that the block club was concerned about, that maybe absentee landlord was in kind of a bad shape, windows maybe broken, stuff like that. So they wanted to make sure that all the property was being maintained so that it didn't become a venue for gangs or fire hazards or just vacant apartments.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry, I don't remember everything, but again, public safety number one. So my time at Edgewater Community Council, which began after I finished my 2 years presidency at EPIC, opened up a much larger scope, whereas when I first moved into this Magnolia-Glen neighborhood, I was just concerned about my block and maybe around the corner, maybe up by Sen. Now, being part of the Edgewater Community Council, it's a whole new perspective of, that neighborhood across Broadway has an impact on me, or south of Bryn Mawr also, or north of Rosemont. So you get a much broader perspective, which was good. I was happy actually to be more involved, because so many times you find yourself just focusing on your own block because you don't think you can make a difference in a larger scope. So Edgewater Community Council was very empowering in that respect, and especially the membership development or leadership development that they were able to provide at that time. And this was actually a formal program that Edgewater Community Council, I'll call it ECC, had, which involved two particular staff members who were very, who had a big influence on me, and that was Roberta Schur, who was the housing director. And again, this would be in 1993, 1994. And Mary Jane Haggerty, who was the community specialist, something like that. I can't remember her exact title. But she dealt with public safety issues, and Roberta did housing. And you would, come to see that those two realms in a community are usually tied together: the housing stock and the public safety issues of that area. So I learned about Operation Winthrop Kenmore, OWK, which had its heyday in I believe let's just say the 80s. I'm not sure if it was more mid or late or throughout. But it was a very successful program that Jack Markowski had been Edgewater Community Council executive director of, overseeing that, and helped him learn a lot about housing, and he eventually became housing commissioner of Chicago. And I learned of the various board members who had been longtime leaders in the community and had worked on Operation Winthrop Kenmore, and now we're looking to do further intervention, and this time it would be on Ridge, because it was now the ugly area, or the area with problems, in comparison to Kenmore Winthrop. So with the help of Roberta Schur, Mary Jane Haggerty, and the ED at the time, Ken Brooks, I learned a lot about the programs that were being assembled for helping to improve Ridge, which was called Operation Ridge. I guess it was the Illinois Treasurer, Quinn, was involved, and people in the county level and the city level. I don't know how they were all brought together, but I just was able to participate in the informational meetings and learned about the programs and how I could be a part of that. So I could be part of that by being an activist and continue with housing issues. I was housing chairman at ECC, helped with the public safety. CAPS was becoming a big deal, and the alderman had sent a couple of people like Reggie Griffin to Seattle to learn more about CAPS at that same period of time. And the second way that you could get involved with Operation Ridge is to actually buy a building and fix it up, since a lot of them were derelict, had fires, had bad landlords, who we call slumlords. And so my partner and I at the time did decide, and that was probably by seeing maybe some of the for sale signs on Ridge, that we would buy a building. We both had some experience in renovation, and so I ended up buying a building in 94, 5806, 5810 North Ridge, and it had Victoria's site address, also 13 units. So I was involved both as landlord, developer, and applicant to the Operation Ridge incentive programs, in particular Class 9, which reduces your property tax for making the building up to a certain standard of renovation, and to have half of the units geared towards affordable incomes. And the second part of me, activists on Ridge, doing beautification, public safety, litter pickup, housing court, and traffic, and eventually traffic issues as well, helping to traffic calm as much as possible. So that was all during the period of starting 93 to 97.
And what was the condition of the building when you acquired it?
So the building that my ex and I, Michael Renz, purchased at 58 10 Ridge and Victoria was half vacant. There was a squatter in one of the apartments. All of the apartments were, I would say, you'd have to say in bad condition. One of them had a hole in the floor. Some of them didn't have operating bathrooms. Some had broken windows.
Was there criminal activity taking place in the building?
I don't know for sure. I mean, there could have been some gang activity there, you know, as it was in some of the other buildings along Ridge. But since it already had become half vacant by then, I don't know what else was going on there, if you would say drug dealing or things like that. I did remember seeing it, but you would see drug dealing happening more out in the streets, obviously, than in someone's apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't tell you, but it was in a bad condition, and there was an illegal daycare also operating in one of the units. It needed a lot of work.
So did you more or less immediately have the building emptied and started on the...
We had to, yes, yeah.
And how long did that process take? And could you describe the scope of the work that...
Sure, as much as I can remember. So we took a few months to start working on the units that were vacant, and meantime help the tenants that were there transition out to other apartments. No one was evicted, as far as I recall. We just had to give people time to find someplace else in the community that they could move to, because the whole building had to be renovated, at once. So that involved a number of systems in the Class 9 program. I can't remember now if it was like there are 9 systems, you had to do 6 or 7 out of the 9. It was quite a bit of renovation. So we did, as I recall, we did the roof, we did all new windows, we did electrical renovation, plumbing. The heating was already good, so we didn't have to do that. So those maybe were the main ones that I can remember. We put all new drywall in, I believe, most of the units, because we had to make holes for the electrical and the plumbing, and the walls weren't in great. They were probably plaster walls, so we put drywall on them all and repainted. We refinished the floors. We also had the building, which wasn't part of the requirement. We had the whole building pressure washed with some light chemicals, and what looked like a dark red building turned out to be an orange building after the pressure washing and cleaning. So that made it look a lot more attractive. And with the new windows, and we put in new storm doors, it made it a lot more energy efficient also for the heating system.
And how long did that entire process take?
I was trying to think now. Gosh, I would maybe just over a year. I don't remember. I don't remember when we first started releasing again, but I would say about a year, because we had to, number one, help the existing tenants transition out, and then, it takes time to get together tradesmen and to coordinate that big of a renovation. So
And you served as your own general contractor?
We did, yeah. We did our own general contracting for the most part, and had a special task force from the city to inspect this, knowing that it was part of a program.
And were you among the earlier people to renovate on Ridge?
Yes, I believe so.
And would you say that your success inspired others, or
I'm hoping so, yeah.
Yeah.
You're so involved in what you're doing, and you, of course, talk to other people that you're not sure,
But you did quickly start to see a lot of the
Tom Moran.
problem buildings turn over.
Yes, we did actually. Yeah, I guess come to think of it, we were kind of one of the pioneers there for the renovation part. After Operation Ridge created the incentive programs, because I don't think there was too much activity before then. But Tom Moran, who's a developer in the neighborhood, bought a big courtyard building on Ridge, and then the one at Ardmore and Ridge was eventually bought by a guy named Chato. And then Jim Kipe and the two guys who ended up buying the Jackhammer Bar in North Clark Street bought a 6-unit building that they were friends of mine, so I knew them, and so those were like some of the earlier ones. And then then across the street, a guy who what's his name? I can't remember. He owned Italian restaurants in the suburbs. Bought that one and fixed it up really nicely. So some of the bigger buildings, which were the ones that we really were trying to focus on, were being renovated. So that was good. And then maybe some of the smaller ones eventually became renovated.
So
also.
how long of a time period would you guesstimate that it went from its prior dilapidated status to more or less majority renovation?
Yeah, I mean, kind of seemed quick, but let's see, we bought our building in 94, and then by the time I started working for the alderman in 97, I think LR Development, is that Bruce Abrams? Yeah, he had purchased one of the lesser desired buildings right at the Ridge and Hollywood intersection, and lesser desirable because they were a lot smaller units. Yeah, I was actually in a couple of the units there. They were really small and hard to, convert for bigger units. So yeah, LR Development, who had been becoming a bigger name in Chicago now for affordable housing, was tackling 1 or 2 buildings there. So that was just in a span of 3 years that a lot of these bigger buildings were finally getting changing ownership to people who were going to renovate them. So that was, I consider it a pretty big success. I don't know, people still talk about it.
Yeah. And what was your general impression of being a landlord? Was it and contractor? Was the renovation process far more difficult than you would imagine getting into it, and similarly with being a landlord?
I was young, younger back then, a lot more energy. So I remember being out on Ridge every day, either working on the building or working on the planter box project, which took 3 years from planning and the first acquiring the materials. I mean, that was a big project to do every single parkway. Like I said, it was over 50 planter boxes, the prep work, and then fundraising too, because the Alderman's office and Edgewater Community Council were only able to provide minimal amount of financial assistance. So we did our own fundraising to buy the soil, the nails, the rebar we had to buy, the plants, and all the stuff that, like food and drink and things like that, gloves that were also needed for the volunteers. So as part of the Operation Ridge housing improvement and public safety campaign and beautification, we also did some little minor is the wrong word. We also did some other projects. One was the beautification of the Edgewater garden with the welcome sign, welcome to Edgewater, which had been started earlier by Tom Green, but it had been kind of in neglect. can happen when people leave the community or you don't have enough volunteers. So Operation Ridge helped revitalize an effort to make some more improvements there on that garden at Magnolia and Hollywood. The other thing that Operation Ridge helped put focus on was expanding or creating a garden where we had a piece, a Baha'i, I believe it was the Baha'i peace pole that says "May peace be on earth" and in different languages, and that was located in the concrete parkway created by a triangle of Ridge, Hollywood, and Wayne. So the plan there was to open up the concrete, because it was a big concrete triangle, and put in our timbers, which we had some extras, and landscape it into a tiered garden that Tom Green created the design for. And I think we had the city do the cutout of the concrete and putting the soil in, and then our group, which we call the group that I was involved with specifically to build the planters and maintain them, was called Greening Ridge Improvement Project, or GRIP, G-R-I-P. So GRIP took on planting that new peace garden as part of the Parkway Planter Project. So GRIP was pretty much started also in along with Operation Ridge, so maybe in 95 or 94, I'll have to look exactly. And GRIP took 3 years, as I mentioned before, to create all the planter boxes along Ridge, and we had an annual planting of them in May, which we invited the community to come out and help us plant. We usually had a pretty good turnout, and then we'd have to do some occasional weeding and maintenance through the years, through the year after the planting. And I would have to come back also with a specialized group of people to help rebuild planters that got hit by cars. So every time I saw one of those planters being hit, and luckily they were of a material that wouldn't break, but they would bounce. They were plastic timbers from recycled milk jugs that we got from the Park District. So instead of cracking and having to replace it, if a car hit one of those planters, and the timbers themselves were pretty significant. They were 6 inches by 8 inches in cross section, and they were like 8 to 10 feet in length. So they'd hit one of those, and the timbers would just pop out of place, and we would just have to take the spikes out and re-nail them back in place again. But mostly the plastic timbers were not damaged, so we'd have to do that kind of maintenance through the year as needed.
And who started that initiative? Was that through the Alderman's office, or
that was
ECC, or the?
That was me and 2 other people from Edgewater Triangle, Roy Stanky and Nancy Kent, who's since moved. So that was actually when I was involved with Edgewater Community Council. I was involved as the housing chairman, but I was also involved with the beautification committee. Don't remember who was that leader at the time. I kind of took a lead on that too, and I proposed doing a project. Tom Green had previously done the Adopt the Corner program, which was very well received, very successful program, where these corners at our intersections in residential areas were adopted, formally or informally, by neighbors, and we could get resources to plant them. Instead of being just concrete or just grass, we could put plants in them to make it look more beautiful. So I proposed to do some more parkway type planters, can expand on that idea as part of my project for Edgewater Beautiful, or the Beautification Committee of Edgewater Community Council. And at the time, so this was about 93, 94, Ken Brooks, the executive director, said, "Well, Ernie, why settle just for your neighborhood? you see what's going on Ridge, why don't you do a beautification project for Ridge? And so I thought about it. I thought, wow, I never thought to expand, because that's not my neighborhood, so to speak. That's other block clubs are there. So, but with Ken Brooks's encouragement, I said, sure, I'll see I'll come up with an idea to beautify the parkways there. And so that's where it was born, and I got put in touch with Roy Stanky and I guess Nancy Kent from Etna Block Club, and they were interested. So we planned this for like 6 months to get a project going and how to do it, resources, working with the alderman's office. So we were very intense on this. And again, like I said, I had a lot of energy back then. And the other thing to note was I was working for city colleges and I was laid off in '94. So I had slack resources for 3 years. So from '94 to '97, I didn't have a regular full-time job. I was working on the building and doing community projects. That's how I had time. So how did this eventually affect the community, and even more so than the community, the local community, even outside of the community? We'd started getting press from newspapers. I don't remember who was the beautification person for the Tribune at the time, but we had contact, saying, "Oh, we noticed you're doing some stuff on Ridge. It looks, it looks a lot better."
It would have been John McCarran, the Urban Affairs
it could have been,
reporter.
Yeah. I don't recall. I was just so involved in getting stuff done locally that I wasn't really paying that much attention to what other people were saying about it from outside. But we did have Loyola University radio, I don't know if they still have that, come out on the day when we had the over 100 volunteers. So they helped broadcast this project to the larger North Side community. And then I was brought back to the radio station another time to talk about the progress we've made in the couple of years since we first started that initiative, the GRIP, Green and Ridge Improvement Project. So that was nice to get that kind of publicity. We would get a lot of thumbs ups from drivers going by. We felt that people weren't littering as much. A lot of times before we started any of these initiatives, you'd see people driving down Ridge, commuters, people who didn't live here, and throw their trash right outside the window because Ridge was a garbage can for all that. So we didn't see that as much. We saw a little bit more respect for the Ridge community. Then through Operation Ridge and getting these buildings renovated, we saw new, people moving in to the community, to the Ridge buildings, people of more diverse income and backgrounds, maybe people who are more willing to help us in the community, get to keep the improvements up. So that was really nice to see that, once you've beautified it, you've got these buildings in order, some of them mostly in order, you've had the public safety under control, the litter, the people start to move in and take pride in this area. So we would meet people who lived along Ridge, who moved in, and get them involved as well in the block clubs and in our greening projects. So I worked on the Ridge planter box plantings in May and the maintenance of the boxes for 17 years. And when I started my job in 47th Ward out of the 48th Ward, that's when I retired from it. I gave them a year's notice. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it had been 17 seasons that I was involved with that. So that was the very last thing that I was involved with. My ex and I had already sold our building in '94, I believe, because he was retiring to Florida, and I didn't want to be running a 13-unit apartment building by myself.
94 or those?
Sorry, 2004.
2004,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah, 94 is when we bought
When you
it. I was
acquired.
thinking it was 10 years later.
So you had it for 10 years.
Yes, we had it for 10 years.
And you just reflect on, the experience of being a landlord and what you learned, and if you had any advice for someone who was thinking of maybe going into a situation like you had encountered. Obviously not in Edgewater anymore, because Edgewater's all been renovated more or less, but it saved someone in another struggling part of the city.
So I had the advantage of writing the manual on housing for the Edgewater Community Council, and that was back in 93, 94. So we had already researched, and with the resources I mentioned, Roberta Schur, housing director, and other people who we got trained through outside of the community and through the city of Chicago, we learned a lot about what would make for a successful housing projects and building management. And I can tell you one of the main things we found out was screening, tenant screening, and a lot of the mistakes made by landlords is not doing enough of tenant screening. And it sounds like you're being judgmental, but it really makes a difference, in how your building will be run. So, and it also tells the people in your building you're serious about wanting this building to be safe, not having people destroy it, and just creating a positive environment for all the tenants there. So tenant screening was really important, and that we focused a lot on that in the housing manual, how to do credit checks, background checks, criminal checks if necessary. And then all the mechanics of what the Chicago tenant landlord ordinance requires in terms of putting the security deposits into a separate account, providing interest. We explained all that, the lead abatement rules, and so forth and such. So through that housing manual, we were able to distribute this information to any would-be landlords and existing landlords who need a refresher course. So that was...
was there anything else like that out there at that time?
No, that's why we created
so
it. The closest
even
thing...
the city's housing department didn't even do that type of thing?
No, not in that detail. No, the closest thing was the Chicago tenant landlord ordinance, which talked about some of these rules, but it didn't talk about things like screening. Where do you advertise? At that time, back in 93, 94, where do you advertise? It was before the internet. So we had a discussion on that. How to do an eviction, if it had to come to that. A lot of people didn't know how to do that or when to do it, when's the right time to do it.
So were you personally coaching a lot of other people or doing workshops, or did you put the manual together and that kind of did the work?
Yeah, we probably did a workshop. I don't recall. Probably at that time there was UBA, the Edgewater Uptown Builders Association, so I don't remember exactly, but I can't imagine that I wouldn't have been involved in talking with them at one of their meetings about the housing manual. Edgewater Community Council was usually pretty good about publicizing what resources they had, at that time, for especially like in the development realm, since Operation Winthrop Kenmore was so successful.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to disseminate it as widely as we could back then to encourage
both inside Edgewater and elsewhere.
I don't know about outside, because my scope was simply so. I was especially empowered through this Operation Ridge and through my involvement with the Block Club and Edgewater Community Council, which is why Alderman Smith offered me a position being one of her aides, and in particular the aide that would be responsible for checking on construction projects, and this time would be city construction projects throughout the ward. So when I was employed in the 48th Ward in 1997, after a lot of the Operation Ridge, the work on Ridge was completed, in terms of the incentives and getting the buildings into good hands, and the planter boxes and beautification, public safety and litter campaigns. In the 48th Ward, I focused now on the whole ward, which included a little part of Uptown, and looking again at construction projects, beautification projects. I did eventually a little bit of the zoning approval process, worked on some of the transportation issues. Parking became a big sore spot as Edgewater, 48th Ward became a more popular place for people to want to live. A lot of people were moving in from south of Edgewater, from Lakeview, Lincoln Park. We used to back then kind of complain about some of the people moving from Lincoln Park, now that I recall, like, they're kind of fussy, they expect things to be perfect now coming up to Edgewater, and we're still just becoming that community, which is the desirable community now of the north side to want to live, because of the diversity that we offered and our public transportation system, the lake, proximity to the lake, and now getting a lot of these neighborhoods, the ones that had been really disturbing to look at, getting those in a much better shape. So I personally never felt too unsafe, or what's the right word? I never felt uncomfortable in Edgewater, even from the beginning, but a lot of other people had felt that way. But in the years that I was involved, and the years that I've subsequently lived in the community, I've been so proud of the accomplishments that the community as a whole has made. It's had a lot of amazing people that have lived and worked here. Too many to number, too many a number to mention. But the block club leaders I've met working at the alderman's office, I was fortunate to be able to be in contact regularly with block club presidents throughout the 48th Ward, because Alderman Smith's policy at the time was to consult the block club for any major decision to be made, and you can't always have a meeting of all these block clubs. You have to call them, you have to email them, you have to go to lunch with them. So I very much I felt privileged, I guess is the right word, to be able to interact with all the leaderships of these block clubs throughout the years in the 48th Ward and then again in the 47th Ward. Just as a side note, the 47th Ward virtually had no block clubs when Alderman Poir took over, and I helped create the office for him, the Alderman's office. And so I suggested that we model the block club structure on Edgewater, because that's what I was familiar with for the past several terms with Alderman Smith. And so we ended up creating block clubs for every single area of the 47th Ward, which I think was a big accomplishment.
So that started in the alderman's office, and that's kind of a top-down approach, whereas in Edgewater it was grassroots from the bottom up.
Yes.
And how did you find that experience? Is there any differences you noticed that resulted from how the infrastructure was created, if you will?
So the communities that were in 48th Ward were, even though they were sort of next door to the 47th Ward, they were very different. A lot more single family homes, less transiency in the 47th Ward, more affluent families too that were very that had higher expectations of how fast things could get done. You know, we kind of nicknamed them as the privileged, the entitled people who were very demanding. So that was a big difference between with the 48th Ward. In terms of creating the block clubs, as you mentioned, a top-down process. A lot of the areas were ready or wanted to do it, so that they have valued having someone say, hey, make a block club, we'll listen to you, and the decisions we make will be based on what you tell us. But they weren't necessarily as involved in regular, what am I trying to say? They were different than the 48th Ward block clubs. As you mentioned, the 48th Ward block clubs had a history that goes back into the 70s. So there was a lot of institutional information from the past that kind of helped guide the block clubs to the future. Also at that time, this was now 2011, a lot had been sorted out. The communications was easier with email. You didn't have to do the flyer network as much anymore. So people could interact directly with our alderman's office, didn't have to go through a block club. So that reduced the need for a block club. Didn't disvalidate it, but it just reduced the need as much. So it was a different situation, even in Edgewater, with the block clubs of 2011 and beyond than it was before that. So I would say that things have improved steadily with block clubs. They're not as required as they were for action, especially to communicate action. The Edgewater Community Council, unfortunately, isn't as involved anymore in the community, as far as I can see, because it's been too successful, along with everything else that's been going on in our community, that it isn't as needed as much as a single organization uniting the people around, because people now have more of a direct access to get action through the alderman's office, for one, and through other organizations too that have a more specific purpose. So again, I feel fortunate to live here. I'm glad I was able to help out during my more activist years. I feel this is one of the best places to live, and I haven't thought about moving to any other part of Chicago. We seem to have everything we seem to have everything we need around here. Since I travel a lot now, the half-hour ride to the airport is not bad. I think the best part is the people that now live in our community. They're not going to let anything bad happen, because the people that live here are invested in our community. They do have some, the longer-term residents do have that institutional knowledge of how things were, how things could get better, how to fight things when bad things start to happen again. It's just a great diversity of people with different backgrounds and capacities, which is what you really need in a community to be successful.